He slid a thick foreign-language contract across the marble counter, eyes glinting with arrogance. "Translate this and my salary is yours," he said, certain the maid dusting his shelves was just a poor immigrant with no education. But when she spoke, clear, confident, and word-perfect, the room went silent. She didn't just translate the paper. She exposed a secret that could cost him everything. The marble floors of the Weston estate gleamed like frozen lakes, each polished, surface reflecting the towering glass walls and the glint of crystal chandeliers that hung above. At the far end of the grand hall, Alexander Weston, a self-made millionaire in tech, lounged in his leather armchair with a tumbler of aged whiskey, his phone buzzing with non-stop alerts. He was known in the industry as sharp, ruthless, and untouchable, and in his personal life, just as cold. His latest hire, a maid named Maria Alvarez, had been working quietly for 3 months, moving like a shadow through the vast, echoing mansion. To Alexander, she was just another low-wage worker in a crisp uniform, someone invisible, her presence barely acknowledged beyond a curt nod or the occasional, "clean that." But Maria noticed everything. The way his voice changed when he spoke on the phone, the tension in his shoulders after meetings, the faint European lilt in the voices of his rare guests. That morning, Alexander had been pacing, clearly agitated. A sleek black envelope sat on his desk, thick and official-looking, covered in a language Maria couldn't immediately place but recognized in its script, long, looping characters that reminded her of her childhood. She had been wiping the window ledges when Alexander noticed her glance linger just a second too long. With a sly grin, he picked up the envelope and walked toward her. "You seem curious," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. Maria straightened, cloth in hand. "It's none of my business, sir." "Oh, but let's make it your business," Alexander replied, tapping the paper. "This," he said, "is a business contract. Not in English. Translate it, word for word, and if you do, my annual salary is yours." He said it like a joke, his eyes daring her to even try, knowing she couldn't. In his mind, she was just a cleaner from some small village, someone who maybe spoke broken English and Spanish, but certainly nothing else. Maria stared at the paper for a moment, her expression unreadable. Memories flickered in her mind. A cramped apartment in Barcelona, her father reading her bedtime stories in Catalan and French, her mother drilling her in Italian, the university lectures she once attended before life fell apart. She took the envelope gently, almost reverently, and began scanning the text. Alexander leaned back, smug, sipping his whiskey. "Go on," he urged. And then she began to speak, not in English but in flawless Italian, her voice smooth and confident as she translated line by line. Alexander's smirk faltered. Every word she spoke was exact, her tone precise, her pacing deliberate. She reached the halfway point and paused, looking directly at him. "Are you sure you want me to continue?" she asked softly. Something in her voice made the hair on his arms rise. "What do you mean?" he asked, trying to mask his sudden unease. Maria tilted her head. "This isn't just a business contract, Mr. Weston. It's an agreement, one that transfers ownership of your company's intellectual property to a firm in Milan, a firm that I believe is one of your competitors." The room seemed to shrink around them. Alexander's grip tightened on his glass. "Where did you learn languages?" she finished for him. "Before I cleaned houses, I studied international law. I was a translator for a firm that handled contracts like this every day. Until..." She trailed off, her eyes flickering with an old pain. "Until I lost everything." Alexander sat forward, his mind racing. This document had come from his own board of directors. He hadn't yet had it translated. He'd been waiting to send it to a professional. But this woman, this maid, had just revealed more in 30 seconds than his lawyers had in weeks. For the first time in years, he felt out of control. Maria placed the contract back on his desk with deliberate care. "You shouldn't sign this," she said quietly. "It's a trap." Alexander's jaw tightened. His mind told him to demand answers, to fire her immediately for snooping. But another voice, one he rarely listened to, whispered that she might have just saved him from disaster. Still, his pride fought back. "You could have made that up," he said flatly. "You have no proof." Maria simply smiled, a faint, almost pitying expression. "If you like, I can translate the rest. But I think you'll find the proof unsettling." For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside, the afternoon sun poured through the glass walls, but the room felt cold. Alexander's eyes flicked to the envelope, then back to her. Somewhere deep down, a realization was dawning. This maid wasn't who he thought she was, and whatever game he'd just started, she was already several moves ahead. Alexander's whiskey sat untouched now, the amber liquid trembling faintly as he drummed his fingers against the desk, his mind clawing at possibilities. Across from him, Maria resumed dusting a shelf as if nothing had happened, her every movement calm and deliberate, though her mind was just as busy as his. She could feel his eyes on her back, measuring her, reassessing her. The silence between them was thick, broken only by the faint hum of the central air and the distant sound of traffic outside the estate's gates. Finally, Alexander pushed the contract toward her again. "Finish it," he said, his voice low. "All of it." She set the duster down, walked over, and picked up the paper, her eyes scanning the dense Italian paragraphs. As she spoke, the room seemed to grow darker, her translation revealing clauses that tied not just his company's assets, but his personal holdings into a web of legal traps. The contract wasn't just a sale, it was a handover of control. "This," she said, tapping a section, "gives them access to your patents and proprietary algorithms without payment. And here," she pointed to another line, "this allows them to use your brand name indefinitely, even if they destroy its reputation." Alexander's jaw tightened with each revelation. "Why would they send this to me? They know I'd never agree to these terms." Maria gave a faint, humorless laugh. "They're hoping you won't notice, or they're betting someone in your position will have it translated by someone they can influence." The idea chilled him. He had built his empire by being smarter, faster, and more ruthless than anyone else. Yet here was a stranger, a maid, who had just pulled back the curtain on a trap so intricate he almost walked right into it. "Who are you?" he demanded suddenly. She hesitated, her fingers smoothing the edge of the paper. "I was an interpreter in Spain," she said at last, "working with an international legal firm. I specialized in mergers and acquisitions, cross-border contracts, arbitration." Her voice faltered for a second, and he caught the flicker of something, grief, maybe, in her eyes. "And then," he pressed. Maria's gaze drifted toward the window. "My father fell ill. The medical bills, they were beyond anything we could handle. I left my career to take care of him. When he passed, I had nothing left, no savings, no job, and no one willing to take me back at my old position. So, I came here." She didn't elaborate on how "here" meant cleaning floors for a man like him, but the weight of it hung in the air nonetheless. Alexander leaned back, studying her. He didn't like being indebted to anyone, especially someone he had underestimated. "Why tell me this?" he asked. "You could have kept quiet, let me sign it, and watched me sink." Maria met his gaze, steadily. "Because I've seen what happens when powerful people are destroyed by things they don't understand. And because," she hesitated, "someone once helped me when they didn't have to. I never forgot that." Alexander didn't respond immediately. He turned his chair toward the window, looking out over the sprawling lawn. In his world, trust was a currency more valuable than gold, and twice as rare. Yet here he was, forced to consider trusting a maid with information that could alter the course of his company. His phone buzzed again, and he glanced at the screen. A reminder about a board meeting tomorrow. That's when it hit him. The meeting was with several members tied to the Milan firm. The timing of the contract suddenly made too much sense. "If what you're saying is true," he said slowly, "someone on my board is betraying me." Maria didn't flinch. It wouldn't be the first time in history. Alexander turned back toward her, eyes narrowed. "Then you're going? To help me prove it?" She blinked, surprised. "And why would I do that?" "Because," he said, leaning forward, "I'll pay you 10 times what you make now. And because if you're as good as you say, I need someone I can trust to read between the lines." Maria looked down at the contract, then back at him. "If I do this, I'm not just risking my job. If they find out I'm involved, it could be dangerous." Alexander's lips curved in the faintest smile. "Welcome to my world." There was a beat of silence, and then she nodded, her mind already shifting into the precise, strategic mode she hadn't used in years. She would translate the rest, document the hidden traps, and be ready to confront whoever had orchestrated this. But she also knew something Alexander didn't. This wasn't just about saving his company. The name of the Milan firm, buried in the contract, had personal meaning to her, a shadow from her past she had never confronted. She hadn't told him that yet, and she wouldn't, not until the right moment. The next 24 hours moved like a chess game in Maria's mind, every square on the board filled with danger. She spent the evening in the library, translating every page of the contract, her handwriting neat and precise. While Alexander moved between phone calls, his voice alternating between controlled irritation and icy calm. He didn't interrupt her, but she could feel his presence in the room, watching, listening, calculating. By midnight, the translation was complete, and Maria slid the papers across his desk without a word. Alexander read them in silence, his jaw tightening with each clause she had underlined in red ink. When he finished, he set the papers down with a slow, deliberate motion. "This isn't just a betrayal," he said at last. "It's a coup." The Milan firm was named Brunetti and Corsi, an old and well-connected player in European corporate law, and one Alexander had never trusted. But seeing them here, tied directly to his board members, was confirmation of something darker. "You know them?" he asked suddenly, catching the flicker in her expression when she'd read the name. Maria hesitated. "I've heard of them." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth. She remembered the way their senior partner had sat across from her years ago, offering her a position she had turned down. Weeks later, her father's small import business had collapsed under the weight of legal troubles that Brunetti and Corsi had a hand in. She had never been able to prove it, but she had always believed it. And now, fate had dropped their name in her lap again. Alexander leaned back. "Tomorrow's meeting will decide whether this contract is signed. If I go in unprepared, I lose everything. If I go in with this," he tapped her translation, "I can force them to back off. But I need proof they acted in bad faith, something undeniable." Maria's mind raced. If the original document came from them, it may have metadata, timestamps, even hidden notes in the margins, things that could prove intent. Alexander's brows lifted. "You can find that?" She gave a small, confident nod. "If I have access to the file on your computer." That night, Alexander broke his own rule of never letting an employee into his personal office systems. He watched as Maria navigated his encrypted email archives with ease, finding the original PDF attachment sent by one of his board members. She dug deeper, opening the file's properties, scrolling through lines of hidden data, until there it was. "Sent from Milan 3 weeks before your board even discussed a partnership," she said quietly. And this, she pointed to an annotation in Italian buried in the margins, suggests they intended to bypass your review entirely, sending it to be signed by a proxy while you were unavailable. Alexander's expression hardened. They were going to stage a signing while I was out of the country. He poured himself another whiskey but didn't drink it. This isn't just corporate betrayal. This is criminal. Maria closed the file and leaned back, her pulse steady despite the storm brewing in his mind. You can confront them tomorrow, but be careful. People like this don't take kindly to being exposed. He studied her for a long moment. And people like you, why are you helping me, really? I can tell there's more to it. Maria looked away, her voice low. Let's just say, they've taken something from me too. The next morning, the Weston estate felt different. Tense, like the air before a thunderstorm. Maria dressed in her usual uniform but carried in her bag the full translation and a USB drive with the incriminating metadata. Alexander came. Down the grand staircase in a tailored charcoal suit, his phone pressed to his ear, his face unreadable. When their eyes met, he gave the smallest nod, an unspoken agreement. They drove to the city in silence, the skyline rising against the morning light, the glass towers gleaming like blades. The boardroom was on the top floor of Weston Technologies, its walls floor-to-ceiling windows with a panoramic view of the city. Around the long, polished table sat 12 people, including 3 men Maria instantly recognized from her research, their Italian features sharp, their smiles thin. Brunetti and Corsi. One of them, a silver-haired man with a predator's calm, glanced at her without interest before turning back to Alexander. Shall we proceed? Alexander placed the contract on the table, but instead of opening it, he set Maria's translation beside it. Before we do, he said evenly, there's something you should all hear. Maria stepped forward, her voice steady as she read key sections of the translation aloud. The room shifted, some faces confused, others pale, a few visibly irritated. When she reached the annotated margin note, Alexander took over. This, he said, tapping the page, is proof you intended to sign away my company without my consent. And this, he slid the USB drive across the table, is the digital record of exactly when and where this document originated. The silence was suffocating. One of the board members cleared his throat. Alexander, I think you're misunderstanding. No, Alexander cut in sharply, his voice like steel. I understand perfectly. You tried to take what's mine, and now... He leaned back, letting the tension stretch. We're going to discuss how you're going to make this right. Across the table, the silver-haired man's eyes flicked to Maria, not with dismissal this time, but recognition. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. Ah, he said softly, in Italian. La piccola traduttrice. The little translator. Maria's blood ran cold. He remembered her. For a split second, Maria's fingers tightened around the edge of the table, the sound of that Italian phrase slicing through her like a blade. Memories flooded in. The dimly lit office in Barcelona, the scent of expensive cologne, the same silver-haired man offering her a position with Brunetti, and Corsi years ago, his smile never reaching his eyes. She had refused him then, knowing the firm's reputation for destroying small businesses under the guise of legal settlements. Weeks later, her father's shop had collapsed after a sudden, inexplicable lawsuit they couldn't fight. She had always believed he was behind it, but she had no proof. Until now. The man leaned back in his chair, his voice smooth as silk. I wondered what happened to you. And here you are, polishing floors for the very man you think you're saving. His words were designed to cut, but Maria didn't flinch. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a second folder, one she had not shown Alexander. Inside were copies of 3 old contracts, all in Italian, all bearing Brunetti and Corsi's letterhead, and all linking back to the same shell company that had been named in the lawsuit against her father. She laid them on the table with quiet precision, her voice calm, but carrying. These are contracts you drew up for that shell company. And here, she flipped to a final page, is the clause that forced my father's business into bankruptcy. I kept them for years, waiting for the day you'd make a mistake. The room went still. Even Alexander's usually sharp expression softened for a moment as he realized this was more than corporate sabotage. It was personal. The silver-haired man's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing. Careful, ragazza. Accusations like that can be proven, Maria cut in, her tone like tempered steel. She slid the USB drive across the table again. Along with your metadata, I also found cross-referenced files linking your current scheme to the same shell company. Different target, same method. That's pattern, and in court pattern is power. A low murmur rippled through the board members, some shifting uncomfortably, others glaring at the Italians. Alexander, sensing the shift, struck. You have two choices, he said, his voice cool. You walk out of here quietly and never come near my company again. Or I hand all of this over to the authorities and make sure every corporate network from here to Milan knows exactly who you are. The silver-haired man studied him, then Maria, his jaw tightening. Finally, with a small, mocking bow, he rose from his chair. Enjoy your victory, Weston. But remember, nothing lasts forever. He and his associates left the room without another word. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. Then Alexander turned to the remaining board members. If anyone here still feels loyalty to them, now's your chance to leave. No one moved. Meeting adjourned. As the room emptied, Alexander walked over to Maria, the edge in his tone replaced with something rarer, respect. You didn't just save my company, he said quietly. You settled a debt from your past. Maria nodded, her hands steady now. I told you. Someone once helped me when they didn't have to. Today was my turn. He studied her for a long moment, then extended his hand. You ever get tired of cleaning floors? There's a desk upstairs with your name on it. She gave the faintest smile, shaking his hand, though her eyes held the weight of someone who had fought too many battles to celebrate just yet. As they walked out of the boardroom, sunlight spilling through the glass walls, Alexander realized he had been wrong about her from the start. She hadn't just outsmarted him. She had outmaneuvered an entire network of predators, using the very skills he'd dismissed. And for the first time in years, he felt something he rarely allowed. Himself in business, gratitude. Outside, the city moved on, unaware that inside one corner office, a maid had just outplayed millionaires at their own game. Never underestimate the quiet ones. They may be carrying the truth that can save your empire or destroy it. If this story moved you, share it, comment your thoughts, and remind the world that knowledge is power. But courage is everything.